Why do race cars fail? On this channel, I've done plenty of videos about race cars where nothing went right for their teams. But what makes the difference between a race car that fails and a race car that wins? The difference between a good car and a bad one is smaller than you might think. And this means that the traits of a failed race car are actually very similar to the traits of a successful race car. In fact, if Max Verstappen had driven his 2023 car at the 2024 British Grand Prix, he would have been knocked out in Q2. That means that if the Red Bull RB19 were released in 2024, it would have been thought of as a mediocre car. Racing teams are constantly searching for the top performance, and that top performance is often defined by tenths of a percentage point between the best and the worst cars. But luckily, this channel has made many videos on failed race cars, and that gives me a perfect bank of information to look into what makes a race car fail and what makes a race car succeed. So let's look at the cars on this channel and why they failed. To start off with, the first video, the Peugeot 307 World Rally Car. A video I'll probably remake soon with better audio. But what made it fail? Well, to start off with, the car was incredibly unreliable. Constant failures with the power steering and gearbox were accompanied by occasional failures of the turbo and suspension. This was partly down to the poor operational competency of the Peugeot team at the time. An example of this was when Grönholm's suspension failed in the 2005 Rally of Australia due to bolts not being correctly tightened. In this case, the design was fine, but it wasn't put together properly. The car did have very impressive pace at times, but its weird design quirks held it back far too often. The car had a 4-speed gearbox because it actually had a very powerful engine, the most powerful engine of all in fact. Peugeot calculated that every 15 gear changes loses them 1 second in time. But this caused big problems. In Monte Carlo, the gearing was too short, and it lost heaps of time on the longest of the straights. In the Mediterranean rallies, where gear changes are often frequent, the 4-speed gearbox should have theoretically meant fewer gear changes, but it actually resulted in more.
The stage of this rally, Sebastian Loeb made 426 gear changes with his 6-speed transmission. Marco Martin's Ford made a similar number with his 6-speed gearbox. But Grönholm's 4-speed 307 made 536. That's an incredible 134 more than the Ford. Now, I'm sure that's not what the Peugeot engineers had in mind.
Why is that? Well, think of it this way. Imagine you have a 6-speed gearbox and you're on a slow series of corners where you won't get above 3rd gear. First gear might be good from 0 to 50, second gear from 40 to 70, and third gear from 65 to 110. Now, imagine a 4-speed box. The lower gears will have to be longer, but first can't be any longer because the car needs to be able to pull away without stalling. But since the Peugeot had more power and torque, each gear works at a higher range of speed. First gear is again good for 0 to 50, as they don't want to stall. But second is now from 50 to 100. It has to be longer to fill the role of a missing gear. But there's no crossover point between 1 and 2. Now imagine a sequence of corners with a speed ranging between 30 and 60, very common on southern European rallies. The 6-speed car can just hold second and occasionally go back to first or up to third. The 4-speed car has to constantly shift between first and second gear. Fewer gears can mean more shifts. And for Peugeot, it did. In 2005, they decided to switch to Pirelli tyres for some reason, despite Pirelli tyres consistently performing worse than Michelin tyres. This resulted in a loss in performance, giving Citroën an easy win, even though they managed to mostly fix their reliability by 2005. In 2006, they pulled out of the sport despite the car finally showing some promise, with privateers calling it the most reliable car they'd ever driven. So, the Peugeot failed because of impatience from the corporate people of PSA, a stupid gearbox concept, and terrible reliability. The next car I covered was the Nissan GT-R LM Nismo. This car was a little more simple. It failed because it was a stupid concept, but they tried to be innovative with that front-wheel drive, but ended up being incredibly slow. In the video on the GT-R LM Nismo, I explained what went wrong in more detail, but the important part for this video is that they tried something new, and it failed. It's a bit of a common theme here. But what about a car that wasn't innovative whatsoever? Of course, I'm talking about the Skoda Octavia World Rally Car, my most watched video. Well, that car's failure was mostly down to how low tech it was. In fact, it wasn't just uninnovative, it was technologically backwards. It didn't feature many systems that other rally cars of the era did feature. Its successor, the Fabia World Rally Car, was very much the same, but there was another problem. And this affected the other Volkswagen Group car in the WRC, the Seat Cordoba World Rally Car, and that was underfunding. The Volkswagen Group split their funding between Seat and Skoda initially and made some very questionable design decisions, especially with the engines. The engine in the Octavia and the engine in the Cordoba were not the same. Whilst both were part of the EA827 family of engines, that's where the similarities ended. They had different compression ratios, different bore and stroke lengths, and different valve train configurations, with Skoda using 5 valves per cylinder instead of Seat's 4. The Volkswagen Group is famous for their level of standardization, yet they managed to find two completely different 2-litre turbocharged 4-cylinder petrol engines in the VW parts bin, something I don't understand how they managed to achieve. This meant that each manufacturer basically had half the funding that they should have been given. Really, what they should have done was use the Cordoba chassis due to its smaller size and the Skoda's mechanical underpinnings due to their better reliability and performance, and then use the money they saved to develop the car more. The next car also shares something in common with the VW Group's rally efforts in the early 2000s, and that is, it's also a product of the early 2000s. But in this case, it was a car that was comprehensively beaten by a Volkswagen Group product. It also had the problem of being horribly outdated from its first day of racing, using a design concept that was more like something out of the mid-1990s or even the 80s. This car was, of course, the Cadillac Northstar LMP. General Motors even admitted they underestimated the difficulty of the 24 Hours of Le Mans and had to radically rework their concept. The next car I covered was a bit of an interesting one, because whether or not it's a failure depends on what you're asking. The car in question is the WM-P88, and it holds the record for the fastest speed ever achieved at Le Mans, but that was its only purpose. Still, in order to get that record, it had to enter the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and it failed to do what most cars at Le Mans aim to do, and that was, of course, finishing the race. So the P88 is sort of in both categories, a success and a failure, but more a success when you consider what its purpose was. Still, it provides some useful insights into what makes race cars fail. The WM P88 was focused strongly on straight line speed, and this made it weak elsewhere. This is a common theme among the various failed races. Nissan focused on reducing the drag and improving aerodynamic efficiency with a GTR LM Nismo, and ignored basically everything else a race car has to do. Skoda focused very heavily on reliability with the Octavia World Rally Car, but the performance was lacking. Another thing that's currently lacking in the world is motorsport news that isn't sensationalized rubbish. That's why I created the FR Daily channel, where I give the day's motorsport news every day without any nonsense, and I speak my mind instead of giving a boring, corporate, sanitized view of racing. If that sounds like something you want to add to your daily routine, I'd suggest subscribing to FR Daily. A link to the channel is in the description. After this, then, of course, there's the Mercedes V8 Supercar program, and this had a load of issues that I covered in detail on the main video, from corporate infighting to weird rules in the race series to the fact that it was an underfunded privateer effort. The Mercedes E63 AMG V8 Supercar was a big flop, and with that, I think we can lay out all the common themes that these race cars have and create the recipe of how to make a race car fail. To start off with, what series should our ultimate failed race car enter? Something open, preferably, without a lot of regulations. I'd say the Le Mans hypercar class is perfect. Of course, there's BOP, but our car will be so bad that not even BOP can save it. Next up, there's often a sense of it seemed like a good idea of the time with many of these cars. They weren't just blatantly incompetent, they often had ideas that they wanted to succeed. Our failed race car needs to seem like a serious attempt. Now what about our technology level? Because that's a super common theme among the failed racers, is how high or low tech they are. They either had incredibly low tech concepts that were horribly outdated, or they had crazy high tech designs using materials from the planet Zorg that only lasted 5 minutes before they failed. So for our failed race car, let's try something that's technologically weird. We'll make it front engine just like the Nissan GTR LM Nismo, but we'll go rear wheel drive to maybe fix the issues with the understeer, just like Panos Esperante. No hybrid system. Instead, let's go with something unusual. Let's solve some problems. Race engines often have all their power and torque up high, but this is bad for drivability. Since power is limited to around 700 horsepower, let's instead go for maximizing the torque. For this, I've picked a 10 litre turbo V16, but we'll only rev it to 2,300 RPM. That'll make it reliable, something important for endurance racing. And because low revs, low turbo boost pressure, and insane compression ratio for a forced induction engine should make this engine actually quite good on fuel despite its size. Many race cars have tried and failed to eliminate the rear wing, so why not remove it here and use ground effect instead? This will surely reduce the drag at Le Mans. Combining that with a large shark fin vertical stabiliser should give this car enough aero to make it around the bends. But what I've done with this car is what's often done with many failed race cars. It has a central design element that's justifiably a good idea on paper. In my case, the enormous low-revving V16 has many benefits. Power to weight ratio of the engine is unimportant due to the generous 1,030 kg minimum weight to achieve, but a 2,300 RPM redline will make the engine last forever, and max turbo boost at 800 RPM and over 2,000 Nm of torque mean the throttle response is amazing. It seems like a good idea on paper, but let's not kid ourselves here. This idea can't work. The weight distribution is terrible, wingless cars always suffer over bumps because of ground effect, and the insanely powerful engine braking will make the rear tyres easy to lock. But a bad design is just part of the equation. To fail spectacularly, you need a terrible race team to race the terrible car. For example, you could have the team represent a car manufacturer where the corporate suits from outside the race team constantly meddle with the motorsport side of the company. Perhaps have the team principals and high-up technical directors constantly being sacked. Maybe some disorganised strategy teams constantly making bad calls. Add in a driver lineup consisting of only pay drivers, and you've got yourself the recipe for the ultimate failed racer. So how does it drive? Well, it's very stable. You can slide the thing around and easily catch it, and the throttle response makes it feel more like an EV than a petrol car. The almost silent engine adds to the illusion. But despite being really easy to drive on paper, the low revs make you feel like you're going really slowly, so you overdrive and end up going off. It's quite the experience really, but also not particularly fast. But let's get out of the simulated world and back into the real one, because there's something even more important to talk about with regards to the process of making a failed race car. That is, of course, the key to making a successful race car, because it's not as simple as just doing the exact opposite. Think about it. The Peugeot 307 World Rally car failed because of a design that was too high-tech and unreliable. By the time the car reached a point of being a strong championship contender, the manufacturer had already walked away. The Skoda Octavia WRC failed because it was too low-tech. So what exactly do you need to do in order to win races? Winning race cars generally go down the route of using high-tech but proven methods to get results. They don't just show up with a radically different concept and hope it works. They do their homework first and test their idea before they enter it in a race. Colin Chapman didn't just think up the idea of a Lotus 79 in a lunch break and then told the team to make it. Lotus tested and tested and tested their car before it was ready. Make sure your calculations and numbers are right. Lots of testing, and if it's clear that a concept won't ever work, it's okay not to persevere with it and try something that does work. That's how you make progress. It's not just how high or low tech the car is. What also matters is making the car balanced. Instead of going down a route that's really strong in one area but poor in all others, make the car good at everything, even if it compromises that one specific area. Winning cars are usually fast, reliable, and efficient, not just one or the other. But what about the team that runs the car? What makes a winning team? For this, you want an experienced and proven technical and management team who've shown strong performance in the long term, but that's not enough. You need the guys at the top to be unified. A competent leader is useless if they're constantly fighting with the other competent leader you've signed. You need to make sure that the top of the team gets on well, and that'll set the scene for the rest of the team to get along well too, as the team won't be split down the lines of loyalty to one guy or the other. If the team is backed by a car manufacturer, the car manufacturer absolutely needs to stay out of the racing team. Let the racers do the racing, and let the corporate leeches focus on hitting their sales targets and using words like superstar, touch base, disruptive innovation, synergy, and agile. If anyone in the race team uses one of those words, fire them immediately. In fact, take it a step further and have them removed from the team in a way that will ensure they're never seen near a racetrack again, or in any other location for that matter. The corporates should only ever be involved when it comes to giving money. When they interfere with the team decisions, it always goes badly. One example of this is when Toyota insisted that the F1 team use Bridgestone tyres due to their Japanese origin, instead of the superior Michelin tyres the car was designed to use. It might have looked good for sales in Japan having Japanese tyres on the car, but it also made the car slower than it should have been. Also, ensure there's stability. Don't fire the entire team the minute things aren't going entirely to plan. Keep your team together. Keep them unified. You can't win everything, but if you collapse the minute things don't go to plan, you'll find you can't win anything. But there's another factor more important than the rest of these. You need an absolute load of money, stacks of cash. You can have the perfect team and the perfect design philosophy, but without loads of money, you'll still be at the back. So let's summarise. What do you need? Good leadership, a motivated team, corporate suits who don't mess with your racing program, a balanced approach to technology, and absolutely loads of money. Get all of these ingredients and you'll surely be on your way to have a team that will never feature on this channel. That's all for today. Thank you for watching.